Good day, everyone. I'd like to say what a privilege it is today to present to you on South Africa's unparalleled geological heritage. I'd like to thank you for inviting me to present to such a lovely audience and to the organizers for putting this together. I'd firstly like to acknowledge the support and help of the FGASA Association of South Africa and of all the geologists past and present who have contributed towards this presentation in many different ways. In particular, I'd like to thank the Geological Society of South Africa for their support and help in doing this presentation. First and foremost, I'd like to say that this has been recorded, so we will not have a chance to do live questions. Please feel free to email me or to get hold of me in any way possible if you have any further questions on the presentation today. With that, I'd like to share my screen, and I have a couple of slides that I can talk to, and hopefully that will spur interest in the topic that I'm going to be talking to you today. So I will share my screen, and if I can just put that on presentation mode and move myself up into the corner. Again, the title of my talk today is on our unparalleled geological heritage. It's almost impossible to cover such a broad topic in a short period of time. We will be talking for about 40-45 minutes, but I'm hoping that I will cover some of the main topics and leave you with a lot of interesting questions and interesting thoughts at the end of the presentation. To introduce myself, I grew up in the Eastern Cape, and I do remember going for holidays down in Fish River mouth and admiring the incredible rocks at the mouth there, which are the Witwatersrand, wondering where the pebbles came from in the rock, and being told that some of them would have been brought down by glaciers from many, many, many miles away, perhaps even as far as Namaqualand, and wondering about them. Also remember playing in the more recent Aeolian dunes, silicified dunes of the Bats Caves down at the Fish River mouth, and wondering how the rock formed, and that wonder has stayed with me to this day. I still look forward to my trips back to the Eastern Cape on a regular basis. The outline of this talk is, firstly, I'm going to talk about very briefly the geology of South Africa, then touch on our national parks and how they fit in with the geology, then take you through a clockwise geological journey through South Africa. And I'm going to start in the Western Cape, in Cape Town, move up north, touch on Hotazel, the Witwatersrand, Bushveld Complex, have a quick look at the Kruger National Park, Kimberley itself, where diamonds were discovered, the Karroo, go down to the Eastern Cape, travel along the Garden Route and back into the Cape Town area through the Cape Winelands. It is obviously a huge topic, and I do apologize upfront for all of those fascinating and beautiful places that I will not be talking about, but are just as interesting as the ones that I will be talking about. I'm going to finish off by looking at geotourism in general, the current situation globally with respect to geotourism, and then finish off with talking about FGASA's very exciting geological initiative and our development of field guides and of a geological map app. So let's turn straight to the geology. One of the nice things about geology, as is the same with many other professions, is that you get to deal with very pretty maps. So the geological history of South Africa spans pretty much the whole of the history of the Earth. As you know, it's about 4.5 to 4.6 billion years old, and we can identify rocks in South Africa dating back to about 3.6 billion years old. To simplify it, we can divide up the history of geological development in South Africa into 6 reasonably distinct but overlapping phases. Firstly, the development of early crusts, an early continental crust in the Barberton area, We know the wonderful granite greenstone terrains of the Barberton Greenstone Belt, which is also where we have evidence of some of the earliest life discovered on Earth, dating back over 3 billion years. On that, we had crustal development, extending the size of the early continental crust, and the accumulation of basinal sediments and volcanics adjacent to those. Tectonic activity followed after that with the development of Limpopo terrain and the emplacement of the enormous Bushveld Complex, still and is the biggest mafic complex ever discovered, with this powerhouse of minerals that it contains. After that, we had the development and the metamorphism of basinal sediments. We have the platform dolomites and volcanics in the Kruger area, and the development of what we now call the Namakwa-Natal mobile belt sediments and volcanics, and subsequent metamorphism. The largest event from a volume point of view was the Karroo sedimentation, which occurred round about when Gondwana was in its heyday, and we'll come to that. And that now covers, those sediments and associated rocks now cover 2/3 of the area of South Africa. We then had widespread volcanism associated with the breakup of Gondwana, forming the remnants of which we can see in the Drakensberg today. But you can see in the little pink areas, the mass of dolerite dikes and sills, which were the feeder dikes for the Drakensberg volcanics. And you can see from the distribution of those that the volcanics would have covered much, if not most, of Southern Africa when that breakup occurred. And then after the breakup, we've had the development of minor sediments and volcanics and coastal sediments adjacent to the current areas. I'd like you to have a look at a book that I've referred to there called The Story of Earth and Life, and by Spike McCarthy and Bruce Rubidge, which is essential reading for anyone who would like to look at how our geology developed in South Africa and what we're looking at today. So no story of the development of South African geology is complete without looking at continental drift and what we now know as the theory of plate tectonics. The Earth, we know, is composed of various crustal plates, which are in constant motion with respect to each other. These have joined together and fragmented in past years, but it's really round about the sort of time that a supercontinent called Pangaea came together around about 500 million years ago, and then started to break up firstly into two siblings called Laurasia and Gondwana, and then Gondwana itself started breaking up. So on the left-hand side, you can see the Gondwana supercontinent about 150 million years ago, composed of South America, Africa, Australia, India, and Antarctica. With the breakup of the Gondwana supercontinent, South America started moving further to the west, the Antarctica to the south, Australia moved to its current position down under, and India started moving northwards with Madagascar just starting to break up from it. If you look at about 50 million years ago, you can see the key things are South America has started to move even further to the west and is still moving westwards. India, interestingly, has moved very quickly northwards and is in the process of barreling into Asia, with that collision forming the Himalayas as we know them today, and Antarctica and Australia moving further apart. Interestingly, the Falkland Islands used to be attached close to the African current coastline, and that decided to move westwards and join up close to South America. If we look at the current position with Africa in the middle, it is on what we would call a tectonically very stable craton, And that explains the general lack of seismicity and of volcanism that we find not only in South Africa, but generally in Africa compared to other areas. New crust has been created in the red areas, what we call the mid-ocean ridges, and has been consumed in the blue areas. And volcanism and seismicity tends to be associated with the red and blue areas. And recently we've seen some very spectacular volcanism in Iceland and down in the Canary Islands associated and closely with the mid-ocean ridge. Let's have a look at the next one. So of our major national parks and various other parks, we see a preponderance and concentration of parks down in the Cape, firstly in the Western Cape and secondly in the Eastern Cape. And then secondly, we see a concentration of parks up in the northern part of the country. The parks are driven largely by scenic beauty, by the geology that drives that scenic beauty, by the occurrence of interesting flora and fauna, and by the occurrence, as I said, of very interesting animals and the concentration of those animals in those particular areas. And I include the bird life. That is not to say that other areas of South Africa aren't just as interesting, but there are less numbers of parks in most of the Karroo, for example, and in the drier parts to the west of the country. We'll now look at a very quick geological journey through Southern Africa, and I'm not going to do it in geological time, but I'm certainly going to do it in geographical clockwise direction from the west all the way around the country. So let's start in Cape Town, where the mother city where it all starts, and I'm going to talk about it as where geology starts. Darwin is well known for his work on evolution and the origin of the species. What he is less well known for is his work on geology. He kept copious notes, as we know, and although apparently he didn't like studying geology, he ended up becoming a very, very good geologist. He visited the Cape in June 1836 and made a number of observations on his visit there. One of them was to be a seminal observation on Cape Point, where his work on the intrusion of the granites into the Malmesbury was helped to resolve a lot of the debate at the time on the nature of intrusive rocks. The other observations he made was visiting the damage done down in the Mildenton area, or Muizenberg area, where a recent earthquake had created a certain amount of damage. This is based on movement on the Mildenton fault, which even today we see movement in that area and occasional tremors. This is a subparallel fault, transform fault we would call it, to the Tulbach fault, where we had the biggest earthquake in South Africa, 1969, which left 9 people dead. The bottom right-hand corner, you'll see an extract from Darwin's diary, and you'll see his comments on his visit to the Cape. And in the middle you'll see a very excellent geoplaque that's been erected on Green Point, and I encourage all of you who can go and visit it to go and have a look at that and have a look at the description of the geology of Cape Town in that plaque. We move from there to down towards Cape Point, the Chapman's Peak Drive, which we know well, showing the granites on the bottom side, and the sediments of the Cape Supergroup sitting above that. What I want to highlight in this particular slide is the very close relationship between vegetation or biomes and the geology. And you can see the Cape Fold Belt itself shown in light blue at the bottom, the Cape Supergroup sediments being very closely associated with the fynbos biomes. And as we move north into the Karroo, shown in the green as the Karroo Supergroup sediments, we move very quickly into different biomes, the Nama Karroo biome. This relationship we can see throughout the country, and although climate plays a large part in what biome develops, the substrate geology also has a big a part to play in dictating what the vegetation is like. Let's go even further north, up into the heart of the Namakwa-Natal mobile belt. And you've seen on the left a picture there of just near the Orange River, I think 5 kilometers from the Orange River. We're looking northwards there. And you get these linear east-west trending shear zones, of which the Pofada shear zone is probably the most spectacular, where you have lateral movement on the rocks. As the rocks moved, they became plastic. They were probably still fairly hot. And they created these spectacular folds. As you can see on the right, the very tight isoclinal almost folding, and some very, very interesting tegmatic folding, where the density contrast has created a very interesting scribbly rock, I'll call it. Almost looks like ancient writing. We move to Hotazel, where approximately 80% of the world's manganese resources are contained in the Hotazel manganese field. You can see a drilling rig on the right-hand side. But the main purpose of that particular slide is to show it's fairly flat, it's fairly arid. I think the total rainfall is less than 300 mils per year, but it also contains some of the most spectacular rocks and some of the most spectacular mineral specimens. Manganese mineral specimens have been recovered from these particular rocks underground. You'll see a picture there in the pinkish color, that's rhodochrosite, which is one of the really, really special manganese minerals. And also the one on the right-hand side, which is called sugilite or vesselite, originally from the Wessels mine where it was discovered. And it's a highly, highly sought after mineral for its gem quality finish. Moving further to the east, we have where diamonds were discovered. The discovery of diamonds at close to Kimberley in 1866 transformed South Africa from a fairly agriculturally based backwater with a staging post down in Cape Town for passing ships to what it is today, an intellectual powerhouse and the biggest economy in Africa. We'll see the big hole there. The Cullinan diamond was actually found near Pretoria, and that's still the biggest diamond that's been found in the world at 3,106 carats. And the one diamond, which is the Great Star of Africa, was cut from the Cullinan. It's 530 carats, and it's mounted in the English monarch scepter. On the right-hand side, you can see a schematic of how a diamond pipe forms, and you can imagine with the surface only covering a couple of hectares, how difficult it is to form. It's also very soft on surface. It tends to be covered by other sediments after eruption, and that is why it also becomes very, very hard to form. We should also remember that diamonds have played a major part in some of the exploration of Africa. And in South Africa, we have many instances of shipwrecks along, especially the Wild Coast and the Southern Cape Coast, where carrying diamonds from India to Portugal, and many legends of diamond finds and many legends of diamonds that are still to be found along that coastline from those shipwrecks. We move to the fabulous Witwatersrand. Excuse me. Most of the Wits is covered by surface rocks. So you'll see on the top left, you'll have the pinkish color is the granite dome, which covers much of Johannesburg, and draped along the southern part of the dome are the Witwatersrand rocks, and a very small part of the rocks are actually exposed around there and in other parts of South Africa. In the center part of that slide, you'll see what looks like the Witwatersrand basin looks like with all of the cover rocks removed. And you can see that it's actually a huge Wits basin stretching 350 kilometers by about 200 kilometers. And that pinky zone in the middle is the Vredefort Dome, which is interpreted as being the result of a massive, massive meteorite impact approximately 2 billion years ago. You can also see the Johannesburg Dome arrowed there. And on the left-hand side, in the bottom, you can see the development of the sedimentary basin and the interpretation of how the different Witwatersrand reefs actually formed. The right-hand side are some illustrations of the conglomeratic reefs. And just as a reminder, over 50% of the gold ever mined in the world has come out of this particular sedimentary basin. Still a phenomenal basin, and it's like it's never been found elsewhere in the world. Let's move into the Bushveld, also a minerals powerhouse, and it's the largest mafic complex in the world. You can see its outcrop shown in the bottom left-hand, all the way from Nitverdent, Thabazimbi, Mokopane, Burgersfort, Belfast, and down to Pretoria. It actually is enormous, contains pretty much, I think, 60 to 70% of the world's platinum group minerals, but also contains enormous amounts of vanadium, chrome, and many other minerals. One that's not well known, that near Thabazimbi, we have the world's biggest deposit of andalusite, which is used in refractory minerals. On the right-hand side, you'll see the main magnetite layer, which is chock-a-block full of, firstly, iron, as you would expect, but of vanadium. And that shows on the bottom right-hand side the thickness of the main magnetite layer of about 1 meter or so. And that is, as I say, full of vanadium in it. Let's move over to the Kruger Park. It's the fabulous Kruger Park. Essentially is comprised of two zones, an eastern and a western zone when it comes to the geology. And it is on the eastern side, it's dominated by basalt and granites, and with the western side dominated by Archean granite and gneisses and schists. These form spectacular topography, as you can see in the right-hand side, and especially down towards the south, you'll see the most incredible topography and incredible geological formations. Moving on to the Barberton area, and this is the place where the Barberton-Makondra geotrail has been formed, and that is where also gold was first discovered in South Africa. And the scenery is spectacular. It's greener than the western part of the country, and there are enormous scenic and historic places to visit if you get a chance to go on that particular trail. Let's not forget the story of life. Now, I'm not a paleontologist. I would like to refer you to Dr. Bruce Rubich and his publications. And incidentally, he is looking at setting up a paleontological center in his original hometown of Graaff-Reinet. If we look at the development of life on the left-hand side, we can see the enormous explosion of life, which accompanied the development of, firstly, Laurasia, Gondwanaland, and the number of the fossil record incredibly rich in South Africa, spanning a period which is not easily seen in other parts of the world, all the way from about 500 million years down to about 180 million years, and a magnificent record of dinosaurs and pre-dinosaur fossils. On the right-hand side, it shows quite clearly the enormous dominance of the Karroo sediments in South Africa. So in the blue is shown the Cape Supergroup, P is for Port Elizabeth. And in the other colors, we'll see the amount of Karroo sediments that are contained in the South African geological record. In the sort of purpley color, mauvey purpley color, we have what's called the Drakensberg group, which is really the volcanics that capped the end of the Karroo sedimentation and accompanied the breakup of Gondwanaland itself. This shows you a general scene of the Karroo on the left-hand side and some of the Karroo inselbergs, which are the remnants of the dolerite dikes which fed the Karroo sediments. The aridification of the Karroo followed the sedimentation, and you can see that in what's called the cave sandstone, which was formed just prior to the eruption of the Drakensberg volcanics. If any of you have had the pleasure of walking along the Wild Coast, and I'll turn to that now, you'll see the most incredible weathering features all the way along the coast in Karroo sediments, mostly of the Beaufort group. And many of them display these very, very, very well-developed concentric weathering patterns. They're often circular and nodular, and it makes a walk along the coast an absolute pleasure to see them. As I said before, there are also still many shipwreck legends involving diamonds along this coast, and many of them, I think, have grown with the telling over the years. We turn to the Eastern Cape, and this is where I've been involved in for the last couple of years. It's home to spectacular scenery on the side of the eastern side of the Cape Fold Mountains. And you can see the east-west valleys are largely dictated by the geology. If you look at the left-hand side, mostly Cape supergroup, but you also have some recent sediments filling in valleys like in the Algoa Formation around Port Elizabeth. You also would have the Enon Conglomerate Formation close to Knysna, where it's well exposed. On the right-hand side is what we called World's View, and that's where we've been doing a lot of work with FGASA at the Kruger Park Game Reserve. Turning to the garden route itself, you have a number of different lagoons and estuaries, which are dictated by the recent geology of the area. If you take a section from south to north on the left-hand side, you'll see you go rapidly from the recent sediments, the Caimans group sediments, into the Cape supergroup sediments, which are shown in the blue colors, through some the Otsoan Karroo group and into the Karroo supergroup in the north, where folding is a lot less and it's a lot flatter, and the biomes have changed considerably. Let's move further west, and there's a global growing interest in the relationship between vineyards, rocks, and soils. And we can see that in the wine labels that have been developed, and you can see on the top right-hand side, geological terms that have found their way onto wine labels: biotite, moraine, gneiss, slate, obsidian, gravel, amphibolite, and others. In the Cape, we have a combination of granites, sandstones, and the Malmesbury group schists and the like, and a lot of transported sediments in the area. In the bottom left, as in the middle at the bottom, is a new vineyard showing planted on transported soils, and the rocks there are all boulders from the Cape supergroup, weathered off the Simonsberg mountain, which you can see on the right-hand side. An interesting aside on the Simonsberg is that there's a defunct silver mine, which was operated in the 1640s, I think, but it was salted. And I think, as far as I can remember, it was the first mine to be granted a mining license in the Cape, and also it was the first mine to be salted in South Africa. On the bottom left, for those of you who have the chance to visit it, is the rock garden at Babylon's Turin, where large geological specimens have been chosen not just for their geological interest, but also for their aesthetic beauty. And Nick Norman has been instrumental in helping to develop that incredible rock garden. With that geological journey, I want to go back to geotourism. It is an incredibly fast-growing area of tourism. The first formal definition was only proposed about 25 years ago, and the first Geotourism conference was only held about 20 years ago. And first international conference on geoparks was held in Beijing, and the first geopark was actually established in Europe in the year 2000, so just 21 years ago. There are currently about 185 UNESCO global geoparks, of which 41 are in China, and there are many national geoparks. And our statement has been made throughout the world and reinforced that geoparks have done more than any other initiative to promote geotourism. I would like to say that through our incredible, magnificent geoheritage, through our national parks, through our system of field guides, we have the opportunity to take a national and global leadership role in geotourism. We've made some steps towards that. There are many, many excellent initiatives in South Africa in terms of the development of geoparks, geotrails, geosites, and the like, and many, many different publications that we can see describing the various geological superlatives in South Africa. We in particular are involved with FGASA in developing field guides for our South African game parks or our South African national parks, and mainly in identifying the areas of interest and in developing those field guides towards developing a specialist field qualification in geology. Part of this has been our initiative to develop an app whereby we can actually not only look at the geology of the particular area that we're in, which would be available to everyone who would be in those parks, but also which would be available for individuals, tour guides, and tourists themselves to actually supplement the particular app through the inclusion of photographs and observations on it. We're currently completing the proof of concept and of this particular app and of the field guide approach, with a view towards getting a prototype out by April next year. And I'd like to just acknowledge that this has been partially financed by the Geological Society of South Africa, and thanks to them. To finish off there, geotourism has an incredible potential. It has the potential to add jobs, it has the potential to attract tourism, and it has the potential to involve local communities as well. However, it's not something that you can learn in a textbook, and this is where field guides are so important. It is something that you have to demonstrate out in the field. What is that? How does that particular landform, how does it form? What does it do? What rock is it made of? How does it fit in with the vegetation? How does it fit in with the animal life? All of those sort of questions are ones that we need to talk about with ourselves and in the field amongst the tour guides and amongst the tourists themselves. And so I'm looking forward to a very, very good future working with FGASA in helping to develop this and hopefully helping to get more and more people involved in the development of geotourism in South Africa. And I'd like to say that you as guides play a critical role in helping develop this particular area of tourism. With that, I'd like to say thank you. Please feel free to contact me. There is my address, my email address. Please get hold of me if you'd like to talk to me further or if you'd like to have any further questions. With that, I'd like to stop my share and finish off the recording.